I am Jane Smith, professor at Stanford. It is my pleasure to introduce a man who is the epitome of intelligence, expertise, and creativity. He has a PhD in economics, who has published more papers than the hit movies released in the past decade by the Hollywood directors. He has been a critical evaluator of the system of national investigators in Mexico, but we all know that his real talent lies in picking Oscar winners every year, year after year. He has directed so many master's theses that I'm convinced he's got a PhD in multitasking. And if that wasn't enough, he was a chair professor at the Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de Mexico, where he finally put his chair-making skills to good use. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Tapen Sinha.
For that introduction, this is a chat on ChatGPT, as I mentioned. Let me say first with what ChatGPT is, the way I think about it. You can think about it as a Swiss Army knife. As we all know, Swiss Army knife is 1,000 different things. It does a lot of different things for lots of different people. But here's the key point I want to make. A Swiss Army knife is not the real thing, in the sense that if you want to do a proper wrench, proper screwdriver, or proper knife, you would not use the Swiss Army knife. It is a sort of a plaything, and that's the key part. So ChatGPT is more of an assistant than anything else. To start with, what it is not, it's not your standard Siri. Siri is about speech recognition. This one doesn't do much of speech recognition to speak of. It's not Google. What Google has, for example, they have a backbone of a huge library of information. For ChatGPT, because it is pre-trained with a much smaller database, it is not the same way that you would expect Google to work. So it's a generative pre-trained transformer, and that's what that GPT stands for. It is trained, as I mentioned earlier, on a data set. So what kind of data set it is trained on? It is trained on a whole bunch of things that are there on the internet. So for example, the biggest load of it is from common crawling off the internet. 60% of the total weightage that it uses comes from that. Second, 20% comes from web text, and smaller percentage come from books of various sorts. And then there's a Wikipedia database that it comes from. The notable feature of the database that I mentioned it's trained on, 80% of it comes from the web itself. So what does that mean? That means most of the database that it's got embedded in it comes from past knowledge that exponentially puts lower date on the past numbers. As a result, the kinds of things that we often complain about, for example, the web data is got biases like sexism, racism, and all kinds of other ism you can think of. The ChatGPT embeds all of that. And books, as I said, it has some book database, but books are underrepresented in the whole scheme of things. If you think about how our knowledge evolved over the past, say, 500 years since Gutenberg, most of it comes from books, And these books are not produced just like anybody out there, but instead they're produced by people who have the knowledge. As a result, they're curated results and not just somebody's opinion about things. So for example, you would be hard pressed to find information about the earth is flat. There are such things, but most books are not written about that because that's patently false. Similarly, other kinds of things that are out there are all specialist knowledge that we see in books. So one of the things that you will find from, I'm thinking this as from the point of view of a user, you will see a lot of people complaining about the ChatGPT is getting congested these days. Lots of the times they can't log in. But if you follow the pattern over a period of time, I have been following it, you will see that there's a certain part of the day that the Google Chat is getting, the ChatGPT is getting saturated. And here the time zone here is Australia time. So if you map that onto a global time, you'll see this corresponds to the main working hours in the US, especially in the East Coast. And that is where most of these downtimes are occurring. So if you're out of that zone, so for example, if you're working in the UK or in India or in Australia, you are pretty much okay in terms of how much it's getting saturated. The other thing that they are trying to do at ChatGPT is to solve this congestion problem by introducing a different pricing scheme, which means that if you belong to a particular category, what they call ChatGPT Plus, where you pay $20 per month, then you get priority entry and so on and so forth. And most of the people are using the free plan, and that gives you all this trouble that I have mentioned. Now, there are 100 million users. We still don't have any data on how many people are actually paying for that and getting that upgrade, but so far the indications are not that many. Some enterprises are buying it for their employees because the employees are actually using them for their work. And that's the only instances that we see people are paying for it. So most people are still getting it for free, and it will stay so for quite some time yet. Now, what I'll talk about in my next talk would be on the architecture of the ChatGPT. Most people talk about what GPT, this thing does in a very generic sense, and so far I have been doing the same. But my next talk is going to be about what goes in the back end of the ChatGPT, what produces all of this. And this will have some commonality with other things that are waiting in the wings. One is the Bing, the new competitor that's coming up, that has just been announced by Microsoft. And the other one is, of course, the big one coming from Google itself. And thank you for your patience. I would like to invite people to ask me questions if you have any. Thank you.